Welcome to Day 2 of the Florida Historical Society Virtual Annual Meeting and Symposium. I'm Ben Brotmarkle, Executive Director of the Florida Historical Society. The theme for this conference is 2020 Hindsight, How Florida's Past Informs Our Present and Future. Yesterday, we had an engaging conversation called Going Viral, Pandemics in Florida, featuring well-known Florida historians Connie Lester from the University of Central Florida, Gary Mormino from the University of South Florida, St. Petersburg, and Stephen Knoll from the University of Florida in Gainesville. Valuable insights were also provided by Andrew Kashuni, an honors undergraduate thesis student from the University of Central Florida. I'm sure we'll be seeing a lot more of Andrew in the coming years. If you missed Day 1 of the conference, you can still access it online at myfloridahistory.org. Coming up later today is our annual Florida Historical Society Awards presentation recognizing some of the most outstanding work going on in Florida history and culture. But first, today's panel discussion is called Civil Rights, Equality, and Racial Justice in the Age of Black Lives Matter. Leading the conversation is moderator and participant Tracy Moore, immediate past president of the Florida Historical Society. She is also chair of the Diamond Square Community Redevelopment Agency in Cocoa. For 20 years, Tracy has been owner of RCP Limited, a symposium management, travel, and media consulting agency with clients including NASA, the Department of Defense, NOAA, the National Broadcast Association for Community Affairs, the Association to Preserve the Eatonville Community, and the Harry T. and Harriet V. Moore Cultural Complex. RCP Limited coordinated and managed the 3-day social conscience gathering From Civil War to Civil Rights, sponsored by the Department of the Interior at the Little Rock Central High School National Historic Site in Little Rock, Arkansas. Dr. David Jackson is professor of history at Florida A&M University in Tallahassee and chair of the Department of History, Political Science, Public Administration, Geography, African American Studies, and Social Science Education. Dr. Jackson has published nearly 24 scholarly articles. His books include A Chief Lieutenant of the Tuskegee Machine, Charles Banks of Mississippi, Go Sound the Trumpet, Selections in Florida's African American History, and Booker T. Washington and the Struggle Against White Supremacy, The Southern Educational Tours, 1908 to 1912. Dr. Jackson received his Bachelor of Science degree in History Education and a Master's degree in Public Administration from FAMU. He earned his PhD in History from the University of Memphis. Dr. Jackson serves on the Florida Historical Society Board of Directors. Dr. Paul Ortiz is director of the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program and professor of history at the University of Florida in Gainesville. Dr. Ortiz is author of the book Emancipation Betrayed, The Hidden History of Black Organizing and White Violence in Florida from Reconstruction to the Bloody Election of 1920. It earned the Harry T. and Harriet V. Moore Book Award from the Florida Historical Society. His most recent book is An African American and Latinx History of the United States. Dr. Ortiz is currently co-editing a book with Wesley Horgan called Changing the System Now: People Power, History, and Organizing in the 21st Century. Paul Ortiz also serves on the Florida Historical Society Board of Directors. Dr. Abel Bartley is a native of Jacksonville, Florida, and director of the Pan-African Studies program at Clemson University in South Carolina. He also developed the Pan-African Studies program at the University of Akron in Ohio. Dr. Bartley is author of articles on race, politics, and the civil rights movement. His books include Keeping the Faith, Race, Politics, and Social Development in Jacksonville, Florida, 1940 to 1970, and In No Ways Tired, the NAACP's struggle to integrate the Duval County public school system. Dr. Bartley also serves on the Florida Historical Society Board of Directors. Welcome to the panel discussion, Civil Rights, Equality, and Racial Justice in the Age of Black Lives Matter.
Well, I want to say welcome to all of the panelists today. We are very grateful to have you and grateful that you gave your time today for this very important conversation. There is no doubt with the on-camera arrest and death of George Floyd that there has been a renewed interest in Black Lives Matter. Some people could even call it social conscious maturity has taken place. So today we want to talk about that. We want to talk about civil rights, equality, and racial justice in the age of Black Lives Matter. Let's first start off with what started Black Lives Matter. Let's see, in 2013, when there was acquittal of Trayvon Martin, then the Black Lives Matter hashtag began. We do know that during that time period, since 2013 to today, things have definitely changed for this organization, and things have changed in America in attitudes, and things have changed in America in activities around protests. So let's get started. I am from the thought that we all have to look at where do we start with this particular movement. I know that I am a child of the 50s. So I grew up during the time period when I used to call, and still do call it, apartheid in America, because we did have Jim Crow laws. So I know each of you come from different eras, probably around the same time. I think I'm the oldest person in the room here, but at any rate, let's talk about that. Let's talk about during your time period, what did you experience? Let's start first with Professor Ortiz.
Yes, Tracy. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me to be on the panel. It's such a great honor to be here with you and Professor Jackson and Professor Bartley. What an honor. So I grew up, I was actually born in 1964, mixed race family. I grew up Chicano on the West Coast. We called it, as historians later, we called it the Backlash Era. It was very difficult times. I lived, after my mom's first divorce, we lived in the East Bay in California, in a town called San Leandro. And it was a very racist town. The Department of Justice actually came in and did a major investigation about redlining, Klan activity. There was a famous headline that actually was titled to the effect, "San Leandro, the most racist town in America." Now, this wasn't in the South. This was in California. This is in the Bay Area. But as a kid, of course, I didn't know any of this history or context. What I knew was the white adults in the society that I grew up in were always angry. They always seemed to be upset with us, Black and brown kids. And so I remember walking to school in fourth grade to Garfield Elementary from the apartment building that I lived in with my mom and stepfather, and white adults driving by us shouting epithets at us. Go home, go back to where you came from. And as little kids, you don't have any context. And so we'd be thinking, wow, we can't go home. We get into big trouble. We're supposed to be going to school. What's the deal here? So we didn't grow up with the signs, Tracy, you mentioned earlier. Now, my father's generation, my father grew up in Houston, Texas in the 40s and 50s. So he grew up with those hateful signs, no Negroes, no Mexicans, no dogs allowed. And so later I grew up hearing that. I didn't grow up in the signs, but it was a backlash era. And what happened was a lot of white people in California, and this was the era of Ronald Reagan, Duke Majan, Pete Wilson. This is not blue California. This is deep, deep red. This is the California Ronald Reagan, right? All of those cynical politicians used racism, and especially anti-Black and anti-Mexican racism, to win election, year after year after year. And they scapegoated us. So on the one hand, as kids, we'd hear this, all Mexicans are lazy. And then in the same breath, we'd hear, oh, they're taking all the good American jobs. And so as kids, it was confusing. Again, what's the message here? We're lazy, but we're taking your jobs. So it was a confusing era to kind of grow up in. And I guess you could say that my youth actually eventually propelled me into studying these issues of racism and inequality in later years.
And I know that had a definite effect on you growing up in your decision as your profession, as you say. Dr. Jackson, can you give us some personal views?
Yes, thank you, Tracy, and I want to thank the Florida Historical Society for inviting me. And it's always an honor to share a panel discussion with my colleagues, Dr. Ortiz and Dr. Bartley. So it's my honor to be here with you all this afternoon. Interestingly, my experiences were a lot different than Paul's experiences. I actually grew up in LA, and that Paul stands for lovely Atlanta. I grew up in the South, and I actually grew up in a very segregated community. So I was born in 1968. And as we moved into the 70s, my father was a minister in the AME church. He had a large church in Atlanta that he pastored, but we were largely insulated from coming into contact with people outside of the African-American community. And so my neighbors were all African-American, progressive business owners, president of Clark College, the bishop of the AME church lived in the neighborhood. My teachers, for the most part, were all African-American. My friends were, for the most part, African-American as well. And so it is a fact that as I matriculated from first grade through 12th grade, I only sat in a classroom with white students maybe once. There were maybe 1 or 2 white kids that attended my high school for a short period of time. But I was in a historic community and setting in the West End of Atlanta. So I attended M. Agnes Jones Elementary School and went on to Booker T. Washington High School, which is the oldest Black high school in the state of Georgia, but it was also attended and graduated from by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And so it was a very rich, for me, cultural experience, right? So in terms of my day-to-day applications, I never saw my father have to kowtow to anyone and to make accommodations to people outside of the African-American experience was something that I was very unfamiliar with. So I became very comfortable in terms of understanding dynamics in the African-American community. And in fact, when I moved, in the AME church, the pastors are itinerant elders, which means that they receive annual appointments and they can be moved from year to year. And so when I transitioned from 8th grade to 9th grade, my father was moved from one church in Atlanta to another church in Vine City. And we ended up living next door to Coretta King on the right-hand side of our house. She was our direct neighbor. 2 doors down was Julian Bond. And so as a kid, I didn't have the appreciation, even though the buses would come by and stop to take pictures of Coretta King's home. And her children were much younger than I was at the time. I just kind of grew up with an appreciation for what it meant to be in a supportive African-American community. Not only were my teachers, for the most part, African-Americans and definitely cared about the students that they taught, but my dentists, my physicians, I mean, the services that we provided were really uniquely in an African-American context that was very enriching for us. So it's kind of interesting in listening to Paul's experiences and what propelled him into our profession as a historian. And I think similarly, because of the enriching situation that I had growing up in Atlanta, I was propelled into the profession the same way because of that legacy and interest in being in Atlanta when the first Black mayor, Maynard Jackson, was elected. I remember the fervor and excitement around my parents driving around in the cars, had on their tags bumper stickers, you know, Maynard for mayor, and when Andrew Young followed him. All of those dynamics helped to shape me into who I have become in life. So for me, I think that the cultural experience for me helped to reinforce and make me comfortable with who I am. And for that, I would not change that for anything in the world. And I actually tried to pass it along to my own children to the extent that I could as they were growing up here in Tallahassee, Florida.
Okay, very interesting. Let's talk with Dr. Bartley. While you grew up in Jacksonville, you're now in South Carolina at Clemson. Can you tell us a little bit about your personal growth?
Yes, thank you, Tracy. And I want to say how happy I am to be with such august historians and hear their stories. Most of that I didn't know, actually, and I'm surprised. But I grew up in Jacksonville, Florida. We grew up in a middle-class white neighborhood called Arlington. We were neither middle-class nor white, but that's the neighborhood we grew up in. And it's interesting. There's a group of men that we have a Zoom meeting each morning, or each Saturday morning. And we talked about the scars, that if you're African-American, you grew up in the South, the scars. My family, my brother integrated the schools in the neighborhood of Arlington. And then in 71, Jacksonville was really beginning the process of integration. And I was the only African-American student in my grade. My brother was the other only African-American in his grade. And so you remember things. These are things that you can't wipe from your mind. One thing that I really wish I could eventually get over and get past was, I remember one of the students had a birthday party, and they put an invitation on everybody's desk except mine. And you don't know, I mean, you're in second grade and you're trying to figure out, why can't I come to the birthday party? And I don't know, and to this day, I keep that, his name, I'm not gonna mention it or whatever, but that experience, it fires me every day, because I don't know if it was, his parents actually did that. And I even keep in contact with some of my former students who graduated with me from high school, and they still have somewhat less than progressive ideas about politics and things. But you see things and you experience things. My father fought in World War II, but he didn't get a chance to utilize the GI Bill like he was supposed to. So we didn't have a nice house. He didn't get to go to college like he was supposed to. He ended up working for the Navy. And so you see, growing up as a poor African-American in a fairly middle-class white neighborhood, that, one group has too much of the good and another group has too much of the bad. But it fires you and it inspires you. And one of the things I developed was a keen sense of right and wrong. And I saw right and wrong. And I saw how oppression works. But the thing that really inspired me was, it wasn't until I got to Florida State and was a freshman and took my first history class, and I realized just how little I knew about how much African Americans had suffered. I remember one professor was saying, what you don't tell a kid is just as important as what you tell a kid. And he gave the experience. He said, if I put an envelope with $500 under every chair, you all would come to class every day and not know that there was money under your chair unless I told you. And the same thing with African Americans. We grew up not knowing, and I grew up in a city like Jacksonville, and hearing about A. Philip Randolph, hearing about James Weldon Johnson, and not knowing how significant he was. And that's the thing that I think is one of the biggest crimes, is that so many of us did not know. And we would have done better if we'd known better. And but the thing I really like about my parents, what my parents did, is they told us that there was no limit to our possible. They had limits to their possible. My mother only had an 8th grade education because that's all the school she could get, because they didn't run buses. My father had a high school education because he got drafted in the Army, but he said there's no limit to your possible. And you set that limit. And I think that's the thing I learned. But if there were no Jim Crow laws, no Jim Crow, but there was Jim Crow. It was mental Jim Crow, and there was limits to what we could dream about. And so that's the thing that I think really inspired my early days, being in a city where there was so much, and yet realizing that I had so little access to it. What I just heard from Dr. Jackson was really inspiring. The fact that a neighborhood where you saw so much potential must have been really inspiring. And when I heard about Paul, I mean, you think of California as a place where that everybody is liberal, and then you find out that they have the same problems everyone else has. So I really enjoyed listening to those two stories.
Well, a little bit more about some of the things that happened to me as a child. I too had parents who were making sure that my life mattered. So the resonance of the Black Lives Matter is very personal for me, because as a child, I was always told that, you live above the circumstance that you are in. So I never really understood that until as I got older and I realized what my circumstance really was. And while we were very similar to Jackson's environment, where everything was Black around us, and everything, as I'm sure in the other communities, except for it seems like you, Abel, where you were in an integrated community, you know, you were insulated. You know, you were truly insulated, and also learned to be very proud of the teachers, the doctors, whomever it was that you chose as role models. But today, that word matter has taken on a whole new definition. It has created a whole new social consciousness, as I said in the beginning, of a maturity of what the word matter means. As we talk about this today, let's take each part of what our subject matter is today, and let's just kind of dissect it. The first part of it is civil rights. Each of you have written papers, books in regards to civil rights through your historical perspective, your research. What have you found as you have done your research in your various areas that has shown a pattern of some sort that leads us to where we are today? Let's start. Anyone wants to start?
Okay, well, let me just kind of jump in here. And I know that my colleagues and Dr. Bartley has done some work in this area, but just kind of reflecting on my own experiences growing up as a non-scholarly person, while it was a nurturing community, I took for granted how persistent segregation was. So the fact that I'm a child of the 70s, after civil rights legislation was passed in the home of Dr. King, that there was a persistence around segregation that existed throughout my lifetime, right? And so, you know, when I reflect upon that, and then when I frame it in a historical context, I start to see in the South a well-organized pattern of resistance to integration. So it's not really accidental that I'm in, you know, I'm supposed to be a child of integration, but I did not go to integrated schools. And so if you look at in the state of Florida, for example, and throughout the South, you had segregation schools that emerged after the Brown v. Board of Education case in 54 and 55. And one of the interesting dynamics in looking at this is that when our fellow citizens in the country realized that the Brown v. Board of Education case was going to pass and that segregated schools were no longer going to be legal, and then the Brown 2 decision came that, you know, schools should be integrated with all deliberate speed. What happens is that there's a movement that begins throughout the South where white people start to set up private and parochial schools. And so they are actually resistant to integration, even though the law is on the books. The schools are not integrated, right? And so if I look at a place like Tallahassee, Florida, where I live, if I look at the McClay School, which is a private school here, very prestigious, expensive private school, North Florida Christian Academy, Talavana Christian School. If you look at the founding dates of those schools, all of those schools started after the Brown v. Board of Education decision. And so there was a deliberate effort to make sure that some white students would never attend school with African American people. And so that persisted to where even in South Florida, we see that some schools did not integrate until the early 70s, for example, right? Until those other alternative institutions were developed. And that's why I always look at discussions around vouchers with a jaundiced eye, because now what we see taking place is that people are taking those same private schools and parochial schools, but they want to use government dollars to fund students attending those institutions. And for those students who are in desperate situations, who lack access to transportation, et cetera, they will still never be able to attend those institutions. And so there's been a persistence over time around segregation in the schools, right? And I think that we've had, and as we move into talking about the current movement today, I think that we have definitely had a breakthrough because of some of the things that have taken place in the public school system with the most recent generation, and in terms of them engaging on a different level with white, Asian, and other young people in their age categories. But the persistence of segregation and racism, it made it easier for people to perpetuate certain things. I will share this last point, and I don't want to talk for too long. I can remember when I was at the University of Memphis working on my PhD, and there was an older gentleman in my class. He may have been in his 50s at that time. And we were having a discussion in class, and he was saying how his father would not let him associate with people outside of the white race. And he said when they even looked at television, he said that stories like on Mission Impossible, the black guy being a scientist on there, his dad would be like, that's not possible, that could never happen. And he talked about how he was reared to think that African Americans had tails, right? I mean, like animal tails. And he grew up believing that. And so with the integration ultimately of the military, but followed by sports and other different dynamics, what that did is it helped to break down a lot of the mythology and stereotypes about African Americans. Unfortunately, we have not gone far enough, and we see manifestations of fears and all these different things in responses to African Americans and African American men, in particular, because of these stereotypes that have been perpetuated in society. And those have actually led to the deaths, I would argue, of countless African American men and women in this country.
You know, Tracy, as you're talking and as David's talking, I'm taking so many notes because I'm learning so much. One of the things I wanted to mention, and Tracy gets back to a question that you posed to us at the outset, Black Lives Matter. The Black Lives Matter movement has opened incredible spaces for us as historians of African American history. I mean, has it not? I mean, my whole summer was teachers' workshops, anti-racist workshops, helping school districts, you know, reform their curriculum to make it more inclusive, you know. And again, I think getting back to your question, Tracy, about the civil rights movement, we learned in the 60s that it was the civil rights movement, the Chicano movement, the Puerto Rican movement, which really led to major educational reforms, which made it possible for us to study our people's histories within our school systems, whether it's high school, college, you know, church, you know, what have you. The same thing's happening now. That is so exciting. I first arrived in Florida as a grad student at Duke University. I was working on an NEH-funded project called Behind the Veil, documenting African-American life in the Jim Crow South. It was an electric time to do oral history in the state of Florida because it was the summer after the Rosewood compensation hearings, where African Americans, incredibly courageous people, stood up and gave their testimony before the state legislature. And it was riveting. It was electric. And I remember when I arrived after the testimonial of the Rosewood survivors had been given. But you couldn't go a single day in almost any major newspaper in this state without reading editorial about an op-ed or a letter to the editor about that testimony. Some people saying it's about time the Rosewood massacre came to light. Other people saying, let sleeping dogs lie. Don't bring this up. Why do you want to bring this up? This is dividing us. Don't talk about this. So right away, that was my introduction to Florida as a graduate student. And the thing that struck me about the civil rights movement or the Black freedom struggle here at the very beginning, because I was doing oral histories in Black communities, was the intergenerational nature of the movement. The fact that, and I was really focusing on the period from Reconstruction to the eve of the Great Depression, but what people were telling me about that period was they really rested on the shoulders of their Reconstruction era elders, of the people who'd survived slavery. When I interviewed people about the 60s civil rights movement in Florida, people like Patricia Stevens Dew, you know, John Dew, Laura Dixie, these giants, amazing people. And they told me the same thing. They said, look, I wish you could have talked to my father or my grandmother from the 20s to the 30s. They were the ones who really paved the way for us. So it was that intergenerational character of the Black freedom struggle that really made an impact on me. Another thing that's very impactful is the universality of the Black freedom struggle. And what I mean by this is, if any of the viewers there have not yet seen Reverend James Lawson's stunning eulogy for Congressman John Lewis, please watch it. It is one of the great speeches in American history. And of course, Reverend Lawson trained a lot of the direct action civil rights movement activists. He was a spiritual advisor for Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. You know, he helped to train John Lewis, Diane Nash, you know, James Bevel, these incredible people. And he called the movement, he said it was a human rights movement, a movement for equality, for universal justice. And he just kind of broke it down. It was just really stunning to see his analysis of the movement, connecting it to this liberation Christianity, right? Taking Christianity and turning it back to be on the side of the oppressed. And you had that vision, and you could see this going back to Reverend Howard Thurman. The last thing I'll mention with Reverend Thurman is how central Black communities in Florida have been to the Black freedom struggle internationally. If you just think about one individual, Reverend Howard Thurman, for Hispanics, he's the person who was able to get generations of Hispanic students into historically Black colleges and universities when Hispanics in the Southeast were denied the entrance to mainstream, predominantly white institutions. For Japanese Americans, Reverend Howard Thurman was the person who welcomed them back to the state of California, because by then he had left Florida. He was in California. He founded the Church for the Fellowship of All Peoples. What an amazing concept, right? And it was his job within the Christian church in California to repair the immense damage that white Christians had done to their churches by going along, participating in the internment of Japanese Americans. And so Reverend Thurman used, but where did his wisdom come from? Again, I'll finish on the intergenerational theme. What he tells us towards the end of his life was, look, everything in my life goes back to my grandmother. She was a survivor of slavery. She was the one who taught me what Christianity was. And she taught me the Christianity of white people, of white slave masters, but she taught me our Christianity. And so it's that kind of intergenerational, and I hear that echo in all of our comments today. If you don't have those connections to elders, to ancestors, you have nothing. And this is what makes history so important.
Dr. Bartley, I know that you have your studies, Pan-African studies there at Clemson, and you have taken quite a look back at our history from Africa in a lot of different ways. And I know when we talk about civil rights, you probably have a different opinion as it reflects on how it links to our African heritage.
Well, yeah, in fact, I'm gonna tie that into the question you asked a little while ago. You know, the Africans were brought to the Americas to serve as workers, as slaves, and they were reduced in value. That is, they were not considered human, they were not considered equal to whites. And then you have the Civil War, you have the 13th, the 14th, 15th Amendment, which gives us citizenship, which is a legal, the 14th and 15th Amendment try to legally make us into equal to whites. But then you have the courts undermining what the legislature had done with Cruikshank and others. And so, you know, with the Cruikshank cases in particular, and I'm at the same time let people look it up, but you have a situation where the federal government says, I'm not gonna protect the notion of Black life, I'm gonna let the states do it. And the states, particularly the states that had slavery, they said, we don't value those lives, so we're not going to prosecute people who killed them. And so you have this long history of whites being able to get away with murdering African Americans. Then you get 1955, and you have a young man killed in Mississippi, and people see the brutality of that killing, and it touches the heart and empathy of some whites who say, I guess blacks do matter in a small way. And so you get a movement started. And the thing that's so important in listening to my two esteemed colleagues speak earlier, you get this movement slowly building, because the civil rights movement, to me, the thing that is most incredible is that those people who went out and protested for African-American civil rights, their lives didn't matter. Whites could kill them and nothing was going to happen. No white was going to go to jail for killing any African-American, and they knew that. And yet they had the courage to stand up and say, my life matters, even if it doesn't matter to you. And then we get to Trayvon Martin, and now we get to George Floyd. You get to having a president. And I think that the most incredible thing, I am so proud of this generation, is because they have stood up and said, we matter. Our lives matter just as much as your lives matter. When we die, it's just as significant as when you die. And somebody needs to be accountable for that. And I think what you're doing, linking that back to Africa, Africans put a very high value on human life. And for a country like the United States, who says we put a high value, I've heard almost every president talks about a culture of life. And yet they are only talking about one group of lives. It's amazing, this generation, I'm so proud to see so many young whites involved in all that, who are saying, you're right, all our lives matter or none of our lives matter. And that's what I think is important. We are finally beginning to live up to the motto that is so prevalent, that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men were created equal and thereby endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable life being number one, liberty and the pursuit of happiness. And so finally, we turn the big mirror on the United States, because America has this big boast of being this and being that. And what these young people have done is turn the mirror on the United States and say, you say you're this, but look at yourself. This is what you actually are. And that's why I think this movement and this moment is so important, because it's forcing America to look at itself and say, yeah, we have these wonderful proclamations, but this is what we're really like. And that's why I think that this moment is so important. And I think for people in Africa, people in Asia, people in Latin America, that's why they are joining this movement, because they're saying, amen, the same thing. You tell us one thing, but then you do something else. And they're forcing America to stand up and be American. And that's what I think is so important about this moment and about these young people. Because you take a Trayvon Martin, you take a George Floyd, you take a Breonna Taylor, all these people, they weren't presidents, but they were people who mattered to their community, and now they matter to the world. Yeah, there are probably more people who know George Floyd's name than know any of the politicians we have elected in Congress. Why? Because people have said that name mattered. Breonna Taylor's name mattered. And that's what I think is so important. We have elevated African Americans finally up to the point where our lives are equal to the lives of whites. And I think if we can just keep this momentum going and make America recognize that if nobody, like what Dr. King says, if you treat one person unfairly, you're treating all of us unfairly. And that's why I think this moment is so important. And I hope the momentum can survive.
And let me just add, thank you, Abel. I think that's outstanding, your points that you and Paul have shared. And I think that we have to be clear in stating that it's an ongoing endeavor. So we are arguing for the fact that Black Lives Matter, but we know that there's a strong contingency of people who have a counter movement to undermine the value of Black Lives Matter, right? And so one of the things I will share is that, and I kind of alluded to it earlier, is that I think one of the unintended benefits of integrating the public school system has been that you have a diverse group of people who are attending school together. So you can no longer say this person has a tail and perpetuate myths and stereotypes about different people of different ethnic groups. That I've even seen a case where there's a parent of a student who went to school with my children who was making some very right-wing assertions, but his daughter, who is about 20 years old, was resisting her father. And right, so we see a generational shift in terms of how this younger generation, and that's what gives me promise as well, is that we see in this case, unlike the movement of the 60s where you had predominantly African Americans, you can look at different places in the country, in Portland and other places, and you see mostly white people out protesting, right? So that gives me some hope that change is on the horizon. And Tracy, if I can just share one interesting conundrum of the whole movement that's taking place for me and for many of us who are raising minority children in this country. I stated about the golden days of growing up for me in Atlanta, but at the same time, from 1979 to around 1981, when I was in middle school, it was also a time of the missing and murdered children in Atlanta. And so a lot of our childhood was snatched away from us at that time. And I can remember presentations being done at the school. They had a cartoon show that they would bring in to show to the children. It was called Patch the Pony. And basically the essence of it was that Patch the Pony was encouraging children not to talk to strangers, right? And you all have to understand, for me growing up, I mean, the conditions were so severe that my mother would not let me ride home on my bicycle alone. If I was at a friend's house, my mother would come down to my friend's house and she would follow me back to our house in the car rather than risk me going back home by myself. And I will also confess that, you know, we used to carry weapons around on us at that time because we didn't know if someone was going to try to kidnap us, right? So I grew up with this notion that you don't talk to strangers. That's why for me, it created so much cognitive dissonance with the murder of Trayvon Martin, because here you have a young man who was minding his own business, walking back to his father's house, and you have a stranger that came up to him trying to engage with him. And here I am, the person that was taught, hey, you never talk to strangers. When he tries to get away from this person, he pursues him, gets into a fight with this person, and ends up killing this teenager. And then he gets off for killing the teenager. And so for me, the conundrum in raising a Black male was, what do I tell my children? Do I tell my son, hey, I guess you need to, any stranger that comes up to you that's white, you need to stop and explain to them who they are, who you are? Or do I tell them, you know, ignore people that you don't know, run away from them, right? So it created this kind of dilemma in terms of what do we tell our children in order for them to survive in American society. And in many instances, you know, if you say, hey, you comply with the police, if you don't comply with the police, you never know what the outcome may be. And so that, I think for us, causes us to lose a lot of sleep at night when we continue to see these incidences occur. Person after person, there's such conditioning that has taken place, right? I tell people all the time that the only thing, these types of murders against minorities, African Americans, Black women, they have been occurring in American society. The big difference is that it's on camera. People have cell phones, there are cameras around in the society, so we have it on camera now, just like with the Rodney King incident. So it's more ubiquitous around us, but these things have been taking place. And one of the things that's shocking about it is that even though the police officers now have cameras on their persons, that they are so conditioned into brutalizing African Americans that it doesn't even matter, right? They still act in a way as if they're not on camera. And so if you look at the officers that killed George Floyd, they knew they were being videoed. If you look at the people who hunted down Ahmaud Arbery, those individuals videotaped what was taking place. And so this has created another kind of dilemma for us. And I'm going to make one last point here, and I'm going to be quiet, right? Is that one of the things I've learned from this, everything that's taken place. I can remember reading a book by Dr. John Henry Clark. And one of the things that Dr. Clark said, he was a renowned historian. He said that when he was growing up in Union Springs, Alabama, he believed that every white person was a police And for me, that didn't really make sense to me until I started to think about what he was saying. And what I see taking place in this country is that, and excuse me for being blunt about this, there's a lot of people in this country that don't like to mind their own business, or they feel offended if African Americans say something to them, even if they are correcting them. So the brother who was in Central Park up in New York, who asked the lady to put her dog on a leash, where she was offended by the notion that this guy would even say something to her. So she wanted to dramatize the moment to make it seem like she was being threatened. If you look at the young man that went into Kenosha, Wisconsin, he felt like he had a license to take a military style weapon into that environment to police African-American people. And so I think, we have to think about the fact that people feel empowered in this day for some reason, that they have been deputized, in fact, to be police officers, like even if it's none of their business, instead of staying away out of what's taking place. And we've seen these incidences on TikTok and Instagram and all these places. People start sticking their nose in business that has nothing to do with them at all, but they feel like they have the authority to do so by virtue of them being white in American society. So I think that, this movement is bringing to light a lot of these different variables and factors that we hope we can change as we continue to propel this movement along.
One of the things you talked about was the talk. There is something called the talk in our community. People of color, each one have a talk with their children for their protection, as you said, more than anything else, so that you know how to react when something occurs that has to do with just based on the color of your skin. That kind of talk, I grew up with brothers, and I was the only girl, so I was, always listening to what was being said to my brothers, but I knew it applied to me as well. I had instances where I was asked to do and be and get back, and I've even had an opportunity in my childhood to witness a Klan burning in a field, a rally, so to speak, so that they were, I guess celebrating whatever they had just previously done or was just meeting together. But I had an opportunity at that time to capture that fear, that trauma that exists, to any child or any individual, whether you're of any age, that trauma. So when you're talking about the trauma that exists for us, for people of color, that trauma plays a important role in how we react to anything that occurs to us as individuals. So the talk is something that most people are having today, but isn't that talk different for all people? The talk for one situation for a white family versus the talk, so to speak, for a white family who you may say have the advantage because they feel, like you say, privileged, have the right to, have the ability to ask a question that you think may be offensive. So you come into a situation as you're growing up and as you're trying to help an individual, be it your niece, nephew, or even yourself in a given situation, that you do have to learn how to live in this America. How do we, as historians, look at this period where we have to provide that type of security, I call it security, for our communities? Because if that is not talked about, if that is not discussed, if that is not carried down from generation to generation, because it hasn't changed. It hasn't changed from my generation to today's generation. The same talk that my parents had with me is the same talk that I have with my nephews. It's the same talk that I have to say to my nieces. Personally, I've been stopped by police, actually made to get in the police car, believe it or not. Instead of staying in my own car, I was asked to get in his car for no reason. Had to stay there for at least a half an hour for him to check my ID, whatever. I really didn't, I was frightened, but I never let him know I was afraid. But I eventually let go, of course, because there was no reason for him to have stopped me. But there were certain things that I knew that I shouldn't say. There were certain things that movements or, reaction to whatever the action was that he was doing that I knew was going to create a safety between me and that individual, so nothing would go wrong, so to speak. So what is it that you think his history will say about this particular thing that we have to do and people of color have to do and have had to do from the very beginning, even from slavery?
You know, one of the things, Tracy, thinking about the talk, and I remember after my sister and I moved back in with my father, and the boys became teenagers, we got the talk from my father. It was very interesting. My father was a very conservative Hispanic individual, factory worker, and I think voted for Ronald Reagan twice. Still love him, but he was very anti-police. And I never understood this as a kid, but he would always tell us, you stay away from the police. They can only cause you trouble, boy. And he was very explicit about that. I remember by the time my brothers and I entered teenagerhood, if you will, he literally farmed us out. He sent us to work on a farm in the summers. And I didn't understand why. And as a kid, it was kind of a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, I wanted to be with my friends in the city. Here was in the countryside. But I did get to learn how to ride a horse. That was really cool. Worked on the farm and everything. But, later on I found out it was because we had just started getting into trouble with the cops. And they came looking for us as young, Chicano, Mexican American kids. We didn't look for them, no way. But my father, that was, to save our lives. And I didn't know it at the time, but I later was able to thank my father for doing that. I think one of the things that was mentioned earlier, and what David points out and what you pointed out, we have a white problem in the society. It's not a race problem. It's a white people's problem. This idea that all white people are somehow deputized to be junior law enforcement officers, that's deeply historical. So as historians, we can go back to the Texas Rangers, we can go back to the Ku Klux Klan, we can go back to the Chicago police force in the 1900s, and we can pinpoint those moments. We can talk about Red Summer. We can talk about the Elaine Massacre. We can talk about the Ocoee Race Massacre, Election Day Massacre in Florida. And in every case, white people become these deputies of the state. They engage in horrific acts of anti-Black or anti-Mexican violence. This is the pattern of abuse that we have to break in the society. That's what I mean when I say we have a white problem. How do we change this mentality among the George Zimmermans to be, right? Whether they're immigrants or newcomers or white people or whatever, how do we get them out of that mindset of, I need to be an informant, I need to be an arm of the state to police Black and brown people? That's what we have to get them out of. And one of the things I see that's really positive happening that I'm so proud of my fellow scholars, and yeah, again, it's the young people leading, right? It's Congressman John Lewis who reminded us, get into good trouble, right? And I have to say this, and I had the honor to be with a group of UF students. We went to Indianola, Mississippi in 2008, the summer before the 2008 presidential election. We know how historic that was. And Congressman John Lewis spoke directly to us in an auditorium filled with Head Start children from the Indianola school system. And it was such an amazing experience because Congressman Lewis talked directly to the high school students and the college students. He said, look, I'm an old man now, but when I was your age, I was getting arrested for good trouble. I was shaking things up. He said, don't wait until you're an adult. Don't let people tell you you have to wait until you're in a position of power to try to change power. And that lesson really stuck with those kids. I mean, it's just amazing. But getting back, and I'll kind of conclude with this comment, anti-racism education needs historians badly, right? Every day now, there are scores of organizations. I've talked to Christian groups, Jewish, Muslim, secular. who are doing anti-racist education. But here's what they need, Tracy. They need historical content. They need to be able to unpack, where do white people get these ideas from, okay? It isn't good enough to just talk about white privilege. It isn't good enough to just talk about, how white people become anti-racist. We have to also, as historians, tell them how you became racists, okay? How you grew up in a culture that was fundamentally systemically racist. And I think I'm so excited the work we can do as historians to do that.
Dr. Bartley, do you have any comments?
Yeah, let me just piggyback on very wonderful conversation from both Paul and David. But I grew up, like I said, I went to integrated schools my whole life. And one of my best friends, we've been friends since 6th grade, but he's a conservative Republican. And until 2008, we could talk politics. After 2008, the water became so poisoned that we talk football, we talk family, we talk weather, but if we ever get to politics, the strains are just too deep. The greatest moment for African Americans was seeing the election of Barack Obama. But I noticed that for my white brother, particularly my friend, that to him was a sign that what he had, we were coming for. And I'm bringing this back to the conversation we had with the kids. He began to tell his kids, affirmative action is bad. It's going to allow unqualified African Americans to take your position. If you just obey the police, they won't bother. He began to give his kids and began to teach things and say things that, from my perspective, were racist. From his perspective, this was whites protecting what was theirs. And so I began to tell my daughters, you don't have to take second place. You don't have to say she's pretty and I'm not. You can be proud of who you are and say and assert yourself, your privileges, the things that you have. And by African Americans asserting their privilege or asserting themselves, to a lot of our white brothers, that's a threat to their position. And the politics has gotten more and more brutal in that now, if you're on one side, the other side is not just, has wrong ideas, they're the devil. I mean, it's an intense hatred though. And so we cannot have this discourse, this intellectual discourse anymore because it's so heated. And so my children go to school. My daughter has some kids that she stays with that are very nice. Their parents are very nice, and they have a very open attitude towards race. But then there are other kids who say some of the craziest things. Why are we tearing down monuments? Y'all have black monuments. Why can't we have our monument? And so you engage in these debates now that have become so poisoned because you have a group of people who have been fed this thing that if African Americans get a piece of the pie, it is somehow going to take away from their pie. And now I go back to what Dr. Jackson said and also what Dr. Ortiz said, with Dr. Frederick Douglass. One of my favorite speeches from him was saying, look, people want to know what should we do for the African Americans now that slavery is over. And he said, just mind your business. Leave them alone. If they want to work, they gonna work. If they don't work, then they'll starve like everybody else. If you see them out in the field working, leave them alone. If you see them out in the field not working, leave them alone. If you see them voting, leave them alone. If you see them paying their taxes, leave them alone. Just leave them alone. Let them either succeed or fail on their own. And if they fail, what you all said was right. They're not equal. But if they succeed, then what you all said about them, was a lie. And that's the biggest point. If you just let people alone, just let them do what they're going to do. We have police, let the police do their job. You stay out of people's business. And that's where you see a lot of this stuff happening. People are trying to mind their business and mind African-American business, mainly because they recognize the threat. And if we can just get our white brothers to recognize that it's not a zero-sum game. if we get a piece of the pie, it does not mean that their pie will be significantly smaller. It's just opening up the pie so that everybody can get a piece of it. And that's what I think has been the real problem that we've been dealing with for long. And you saw it in 2008. And if you hear the rhetoric, we got a black president. Oh no, what are they going to take now? My friend talks about, how many black quarterbacks are we going to have now? We used to didn't have any. Now it seems like all the quarterbacks are black. The notion is if we get something, it's at the expense of someone else. And if we can get away from the zero-sum game mentality, I think that our society will be so much better. You see it in our arguments over immigration. You see it in the arguments about women's rights. You see it in the arguments about almost everything. This notion that if somebody else gets a piece of the pie, that by definition means I have less pie. And I think that that's been the struggle that we've had in America almost from the beginning. That our white brothers have, for whatever reason, saw that anybody else moving up in society is going to automatically mean that they're going to lose something. And then that talk, my father, I had 7 brothers, I had 6 brothers and 2 sisters, but my father told me, he was fairly conservative. And he said, son, when you talk to the police, lower your head, don't raise your voice, make sure they can always see your hand. And I was kind of rebellious on that idea because, my friends that are white, they didn't do that. But then I realized that they had a totally and a radically different experience when you talk about the police than I did. And so you have to tell your children that in this society, even today, you might be right, but you can be dead right. And so you have to have an experience with the police where you demonstrate a level of respect that you may not demonstrate other places, because at the end of the day, what I want you to do is come home safely.
If I could just piggyback on what Abel just said, he broke it down for us. My gosh, this idea of the zero-sum game of American politics, this is at the root of the problem, is it not? This is something that does go back to the so-called founding fathers, because they were the ones that set this context for this idea that if you win some rights, I lose some rights. And we've got to help our brothers and sisters out of that mentality. That was the Backlash Era I grew up in. And again, just to reiterate what I said in the beginning, I heard it over and over again. These blacks and Mexicans, they gained so much, they've taken everything from us. This idea that if we're more economically secure, that somehow it's a negative impact on white people, when exactly the opposite. Look, if you may think you're rich, but if I'm your neighbor and I'm living in desperate poverty, you're not safe and I'm not safe. And we've got, as historians, there's so many things we can do. The names of people like Frederick Douglass, Ella Baker, Dr. King, people we've been talking about on this panel tonight, none of them believed that human rights were a zero-sum game, right? And that's what we have to start teaching, because again, that was the mentality my generation grew up in. We called it Reaganism, self-interest, right? Self-interest was supposed to govern all human relations. So on the one hand, some of us began to be able to teach about the African-American civil rights movement, but at the same time, we have this really acidic doctrine of a zero-sum game, which is operating at the same time. Well, that undermines every goal, every idea that people like Dr. King and James Lawson and John Lewis had. We've got to do away with the zero-sum theory of American citizenship.
Well, we've talked about a lot of things here, and from the perspective of what our subject matter is. As we look at education, housing, jobs, equality, all of those matter in the equation, of course, on how any group of people or any culture is viewed. So as we move into the fact that there is inequality in most of those areas, so we're working with the fact that there is something to now have to reach before we can all maybe talk on the same plane. What do you think is going to help us get there? I know having conversations such as this is important. Black Lives Matter say that we need to change things far as procedures with the police department. Black Lives Matter has also created other hashtags that are looking at different areas of our lives, of our society. And those have become the new movements, so to speak, to change the things when it comes to, issues of education and issues of jobs and fair housing. Each of you have an important role as your as professors in the areas that you're talking about to your students and to the community, and seminars that you're holding. What are you currently doing that you think will move the needle as we move forward with this new look, a new movement? Paul, I know that you have a lot of things that are going on that you have been doing, you've been involved in. Can you share with us some of those things that you have coming up or have recently done?
Yes, one of the things, Tracy, it's so exciting to me is to see school districts really driven by student activism again, and activism by parents and teachers in terms of changing curriculum. And what I mean by this, for example, I'm working right now with the state of Connecticut. Connecticut has recently passed a law requiring the teaching of Black history, of Puerto Rican history, and Latino history as requirements, not electives. The law says every student that graduates from high school in the state of Connecticut will take African American, Latino, and Puerto Rican histories. So that sounds good in theory, but as they say, the devil's in the details, right? So this is where historians are really stepping up, and not just historians. Let's be kind to our colleagues in English and Anthro and Soc and all those other fields. So there's work for all to do, right? So a lot of scholars have been working with the State Board of Education in Connecticut to provide content, because now that students will get to learn these amazing topics. And I want to stop there and say it's so inspiring to see students protesting for the right to learn more, right? Just kind of like our ancestors and elders did in the 60s and 70s when they demanded African American studies, women's studies, Asian American studies, right? And so our students at UF are doing the same thing, by the way. We've had a wonderful African American studies program for over half a century. And several years ago, our students began to ask us, why are we not a department? First off, why can't we even offer a major? And then we achieved that. Now we're working on getting departmental status. And so there's activity on all different fronts. In terms of working with school districts, the Florida Humanities Council and our organization, the Florida Historical Society, is doing wonderful work in getting the word out and helping districts provide content to districts. Because the thing we need to recognize, Tracy, is everything we've been talking about tonight is wonderful, except for one fact. We didn't do the job we need to do in our colleges of education to train our young teachers these complex histories, right? And especially how these histories intersect. How do the histories of Black and Mexican and Hispanic people intersect, right? How do the histories of Asian Americans intersect with African Americans in the South? We've written books about this, and all three of us on this panel and all four of us have lectured on these topics. But we were beginning to try to figure out, working especially with our College of Ed colleagues, how do we train teachers in the making to offer these topics? Black Lives Matter, for example. The idea of that policing in America hasn't always been fair, right? Just that idea can be revolutionary for a lot of our young students. There's books about that now. There's hundreds of books on prison reform, on policing reform. So getting that content to teachers that's just one of many different levels. But I think it's fundamentally important because, as David and Abel mentioned earlier, the importance of public schools in this struggle cannot be underemphasized. So the last thing I'll say on this is the state of Florida just passed a law requiring all school districts in this state to teach about what happened during the Election Day massacre in Ocoee, Florida in 1920, a horrific anti-Black pogrom. Now we have a law in the books. All 67 or 68 of our districts will teach this course. But here's the problem. Where's the funding? Okay, so that's a question. Is this an unfunded mandate? Again, this is the role that we in the Florida Historical Society, anyone watching this, look, it doesn't matter if you're a professor, a teacher, a parent, a student, a community member. Now we all have a role. We passed a law in 1994 requiring the teaching of African American history in all school districts. But we've seen how uneven, unequal that mandate has been implemented. So here's the challenge tonight. In this new era, do we believe that Black Lives Matter? If we do, we have to teach people about the Ocoee Election Day Massacre. My gosh, this is the 100th anniversary of this horrific event, which happened on Election Day 1920. We're talking about voter suppression. We're talking about equality. We're talking about Black Lives Matter. This is one event out of many. My gosh, we've got to play a role in teaching. But how do we do it? So that's kind of a charge to us, right?
It is. It is indeed. Dr. Jackson.
Malcolm X used to teach that education is our passport to the future, for tomorrow belongs to those who prepare for it today. And I feel very fortunate and blessed in terms of my career choice to work at a historically Black university. I've had an opportunity just in terms of my livelihood and my vocation as a historian to work with a number of African American and minority students over the course of my career. And I found it to be very rewarding work, but also to create pathways for individuals who had not thought about becoming historians or excelling in whatever endeavor they engaged in. One of the things we did at Florida A&M University, believe it or not, in the 1980s when I was a student, is that we were protesting at that time to make African American history mandatory for all students that attended the university. So I've had the benefit and privilege of teaching students who are pharmacists today, who are politicians today, who are scientists today, but I know that they've gotten some exposure to African American history. And as Dr. Ortiz was saying, unfortunately, the school system has not equipped teachers. Carter G. Woodson called it miseducation, that they don't have the tools, even if they desire to teach about some of the things that we're talking about today, they were never exposed to it as they matriculated at their institutions. That could be Black or white institutions, Black or white teachers. And so there is a knowledge gap between where the teachers need to be able to share this information and where they actually are. And I think part of that is unfortunate because Woodson wrote that magnum opus in 1933, but we still are having the same kind of conversation today. The other point I would make is that Florida A&M University is, I think the report just came out, is listed as number 20 on the Social Mobility Index. And that's very significant because that index measures how an institution moves a person from one socioeconomic class category into another category. And so out of the hundreds of institutions, thousands in the United States, what we find is that institutions like Harvard, Princeton, and Yale are at the bottom of that list. But in 4 to 6 years, we have an institution where our students are coming in and their family's income is around $26,000. And in 4 to 6 years, our students are graduating more than their families have made collectively. And so that's why I said I feel fortunate and blessed. And I've worked in corporate America and I didn't feel fortunate and blessed when I was working in that environment. So I can say with some assurity that in working in the environment that I work in today, I feel like I'm making a difference. And I think my upbringing and growing up in Atlanta and attending Florida A&M University is what pointed me back to Florida A&M University, because just as individuals were able to touch me and make a difference in my life, I felt like I had an obligation to touch other people's lives and to be there for them to make sure that they were successful in whatever they decided to do. And so it's been my honor and privilege to work at Florida A&M University and in the space of a historically Black university.
Dr. Bartley.
Yeah, there are really 3 or 4 things that I can really point to that I'm very proud of, that I'm a part of. One, when I got to Clemson University back in 2004, they had a moribund African American Studies program, and we were able to create a Pan-African Studies program. We've graduated 7 people with Pan-African Studies degrees. All of them are working, and that's one of the things I am very proud of. The other thing I'm very proud of is I got to take 50 Clemson University students to the opening of the African American History Museum, and I still get emails from some of those students who thank me for the experience that they were able to go. You know, I critiqued our football program. They went to when they won the national championship twice, they went to visit the White House. And I said, they told me they didn't have time to go by the African American History Museum. And I really critiqued that because, you know, a team that's 60% African American, you got time to go see the president, but you don't have time to go by and take a look at the roots that created these athletes. And the other thing is, I'm the vice chair of the South Carolina African American Heritage Commission. And I don't know if you all saw it, but a few months ago, a teacher in Columbia, South Carolina, as a lesson on slavery, took the Black kids and held an auction of them as slaves. And she was surprised when the community resisted and had a fit. But they called the actual Secretary of Education for the state of South Carolina called on the South Carolina African American Heritage Commission to write up teacher guides to help explain and direct teachers in teaching difficult subjects like slavery and those other things. And so we've been doing this for years. We've been teaching teachers in the public schools, particularly in South Carolina, how to teach subjects like slavery, civil rights. One of the things we had a tremendous debate over is Civil War and Reconstruction, because you have this long period on Civil War and Reconstruction, which actually lasted twice as long, sometimes 3 times as long as the Civil War. You get, you know, a day or a half an hour lecture on that. And so I'm very proud that we're now emphasizing. We have the first Reconstruction monument here in South Carolina, for the first in the country. And I'm very proud of the fact that I had a part of helping expand people's mind. I really like the book that Paul wrote on, talking about democracy denied us. And I've used that in telling, what would have happened if African Americans had the right to vote? How different would our country be? The politics and all those things. And, and then, even I've had the privilege of teaching from Dr. Jackson's book, Mound Bayou and the significance of people who, in Mississippi who built this community. They made some sacrifice, but they built a community to demonstrate the fact that African Americans had this independence. And so I'm so proud, like Dr. Jackson said, to have been introduced to these tremendous historians that I can borrow their knowledge and give it to kids, and those kids take that knowledge and go and move on. I have several kids who are now studying at Harvard, Princeton, and Yale who during this period have written me and say, Dr. Bartley, what can I do? How can I make this thing better? And that's the thing I'm most proud of, is the students who email me back or write back or call back, and they tell me how much they enjoy learning stuff from me. Those are the things I'm most proud of. And I'm very proud of the Florida Historical Society for organizing a program like this. And I know you're gonna get some kickback or whatever, but I think the kickback will be well worth what people will learn.
Well, we definitely have learned a lot from each of you and appreciate your willingness to express your personal views as well as your historical perspectives. I always say, speak now so you can speak again later. So I want you to all realize that what you have spoken today mean a lot to a lot of people. I appreciate each participant and all that has been told today, and the work that you're continuing to do. And I look forward to seeing each of you, since we're all a part of the Florida Historical Society, at our very next gathering in person. But this has been great. I think it's good to have conversations and to continue this type of conversation, because our history is a part of American history. and we want to make sure that everyone knows it. So thank you very much again, and each of you be safe, and I look forward to seeing you the next time. Thank you.
Thank you very kindly.
Thank you so much.
Take care, colleagues.
What a stimulating conversation. Thanks to the panel for an informative and engaging session. If you're enjoying this conference, please consider becoming a member of the Florida Historical Society. We're presenting this virtual annual meeting and symposium free of charge because we understand that not everybody can afford to become a member. If you're a student or even a professor of history, we certainly understand that you might not have the means right now to become a member of the Florida Historical Society. If you can become a member, though, we would encourage you to do so. It's very easy to do. Just go to myfloridahistory.org or call us at 321-690-1971, extension 217. This is the Florida Historical Society Virtual Annual Meeting and Symposium. I'm Ben Brotmarkle. Every year at our conference, we recognize the most outstanding work going on around the state and beyond in Florida history and culture. Usually, we're sitting in a fancy banquet hall or some other picturesque setting after just having had a wonderful meal and maybe a glass of wine. This year, we'll just have to imagine those surroundings, but this part of our conference is no less special in this virtual setting. Before we get started with our virtual awards presentation, our Florida Historical Society President, Emily Liska, is here to offer her congratulations to the award recipients.
Hello all and welcome to the second day of the Florida Historical Society's Fall Conference. I hope everyone got to listen to the panel, and now you're in for a real treat. A big congratulations go out to all of this year's award recipients. These are special Florida Historical Society awards, some of them established for many decades. I want to particularly mention one of the awards, that is the Marinus Latour Presidential Citation. And I do want to mention the recipients, Cisco and Gloria Dean. I thank them so much for their dedication to the Florida Historical Society, and more particularly to the cause of Florida history. Thank them both. I hope you stay tuned to watch some of these inspiring awards and inspiring award winners. Thanks for joining us, and thank you for your support for Florida history and the Florida Historical Society.
Thanks, Emily. Our first award is the Tarleton Tabot Award for Outstanding General Interest Book on a Florida History Topic. The recipient this year is Mark Lane for his book, Roaring Reptiles, Bountiful Citrus, and Neon Pies, An Unofficial Guide to Florida's Official Symbols. Tarleton Tabot was a longtime professor of history at the University of Miami and author of the classic book, A History of Florida. Mark Lane is a columnist for the Daytona Beach News Journal and is the recipient of this year's Tarleton Tabot Award for Roaring Reptiles, Bountiful Citrus, and Neon Pies, An Unofficial Guide to Florida's Official Symbols. Congratulations, Mark Lane.
Well, thank you very much. I remember being pleasantly surprised when the award was first announced, because the subcategory of historical humor writing is not jam-packed with titles, and not everyone is even happy that it exists. So I'm grateful to your organization that you and your judges are not easily offended. I'm a newspaper columnist by trade, and I find that my most negative blowback comes from people who thought they were settling into a well-behaved policy think piece, only to encounter bemused ridicule, exaggeration, and mockery of our hardworking public servants. So add to that cheap jokes at the expense of our glorious past, revered symbols and illustrious forebearers, and you're not necessarily creating a crowd pleaser. So I was delighted at this recognition. My college background is actually in history, not in journalism. I lucked into, I was in Boston University and found out that being an undeclared major was not something you could actually have on your diploma. So having to come up with something fast, I realized that by studying history, I could explore anything I wanted as long as it already happened. which is the kind of limitation I can work with. And although a master's degree in history is something that no job description I know has ever demanded, it's a background that has really served me exceedingly well in journalism, because it teaches you to assess the reliability of sources and come up with good reasons for the why things happened the way they did, and to write clearly about what you find out in the process. And these are analytical habits and writing practices we could stand to see more of in media and public life. So thank you for honoring history written for a popular audience, an audience that is out there, that is hungry for more, and helps support the vital work of the pros. Thank you.
Congratulations again, Mark. The Rembert Patrick Award is for Outstanding Scholarly Book on a Florida History Topic. Rembert Patrick was a longtime professor of history at the University of Florida and author of the acclaimed book, Florida Under 5 Flags. This year's recipient of the Rembert Patrick Award is David J. Nelson. David J. Nelson is professor of history at Abraham Baldwin Agricultural College at Bainbridge, Georgia. His book is How the New Deal Built Florida Tourism, the Civilian Conservation Corps, and State Parks. Congratulations, Dave Nelson.
Hi, this is Dave Nelson, and I just want to record a short message to the Florida Historical Society to thank you for the recent award, the Rembert Patrick Award, for my first book. Obviously, any award, any recognition for anybody who writes, especially in history, because so few people often read our work, it always feels good, regardless. But as a Floridian and somebody who openly calls themselves a Florida historian, this really does mean a lot. The Florida Historical Society has always been part of my academic career, going back to when I was an undergrad and first started going to the meetings, to workshops I've done there, to research I've done at the library, and to publishing in the journal. I mean, it's always so exciting that anytime you're working on a research project and you go down these academic or archival rabbit holes and you wonder, does anybody care other than me? So again, it just feels so good to have people recognize that work. But for me personally, coming from the Florida Historical Society really does mean a lot. As I said, when I first started out as an undergrad at University of North Florida in my hometown of Jacksonville, one of the very first classes I took was Florida history by Dr. Susan Parker, that spring of '97. And I took classes with Dan Schaefer and Michael Francis and archaeologist Robert Tunin. All of them not only sparked my interest in Florida history, but also encouraged me to continue my studies. And I can distinctly remember in March of 1997, sitting in the library at UNF, I had a couple of Florida Historical Quarterly journals in front of me. And I was doing a project, and I remember seeing the name of Susan Parker and Dan Schaefer and others such as Gerald Schaffner in there. And I just remember thinking, if I could just get published in here, if I could just be accepted by it and be a part of that group, that's all I want. And it took about 10 years to get into the journal. And now with this award, I feel like I've done it. This may be the last thing I ever do, but I feel like I've done it. And it does, I do feel like I've fulfilled 20 years ago. I finally did it. So thank you so much for everything. And hopefully we'll have more interactions in the future. And I wish we could be in person, but obviously we can't. So thank you again so much. Bye.
Congratulations, Dave. The Patrick D. Smith Award is for an outstanding novel on a Florida history topic. Patrick Smith was author of the beloved novel A Land Remembered that incorporated Florida history into a fictional setting. This year's recipient of the Patrick D. Smith Award is Robert N. McComber. He is a former Department of Defense consultant and an accomplished sailor. His novel, Honoring the Enemy, a Captain Peter Wake novel, looks at Americans landing in Spanish-controlled Cuba in 1898. Congratulations, Bob McComber.
Thank you. It was a great pleasure, and I looked forward to it for many years in working with the research on this and looking at the locales to tell the story of what Tampa was like in 1898 and how that war changed American history forever and impacts us to this very day. And it all started, of course, in Florida. That's where the staging area for the invasion of Cuba was. And it is a great honor and delighted to get the award that is named for Patrick Smith. I knew Patrick Smith. My very first book got this award also almost 20 years ago. And it means a tremendous amount to me, having written many books about Florida, to have this award for this newest one right here. So thank you very, very much. And I am absolutely delighted and honored to have this award. Thank you.
Congratulations, Bob. The Harry T. and Harriet V. Moore Book Award is for an outstanding book focusing on ethnic groups and social issues. Harry T. and Harriet V. Moore were educators and civil rights activists who were killed by domestic terrorists who planted a bomb under their home in Mims, Florida on Christmas night 1951. The recipient of this year's Harry T. and Harriet V. Moore Award is Christine Ardalan. Christine Ardalan is a history lecturer at Florida International University. Her book is The Public Health Nurses of Jim Crow, Florida. Congratulations, Christine.
Thank you so much. I felt so moved and so honored by receiving this award. And I would really like to thank everyone for selecting it. I was mentioning to Ben in my email a little while ago that I grew up in England, not knowing much about American history. In fact, perhaps not knowing anything about American history. Fulfilled my childhood ambition to become a nurse, and which I did in London. And subsequently, much later, after living in Vancouver and California and Washington, D.C., I came to Miami. And it was there that I returned to school and started to take history classes. I loved them. My first project then was about the history of nursing, and that was when I met Thelma Gibson. Dear Thelma Gibson was such a great inspiration and support to my work. She introduced me to her colleagues, her nursing colleagues, who taught me about African-American history and introduced me to so many aspects that I had they gave me first-person accounts of. It was a very, very interesting and informative time for me. And that has been, the history of nursing has been my life's work ever since. So I would like to thank Thelma Gibson for introducing me to her colleagues and for introducing me to the issues of civil rights. And it was then that I learned about Harry and Harriet Moore. And I would like to, I do so much appreciate this award in their honor. Thank you. Thank you again. I haven't actually thanked the teachers and the professors that along the way have also helped me. There have been some I've had outstanding help for many, many years, including Sherry Johnson and Kirsten Wood and Dodd and Pyron and many of the other professors at Florida International University and the University of Miami. So I would like to thank all the people that have supported my work along the way. And thank you to the Florida Historical Society for this most wonderful award. Thank you.
Congratulations again, Christine. The Stetson Kennedy Award is for outstanding Florida-related book supportive of human rights, traditional cultures, or the natural environment. Stetson Kennedy is best known for his book Palmetto Country and The Klan Unmasked. The recipient of this year's Stetson Kennedy Award is John M. Dunn. John M. Dunn is a journalist, educator, and water advocate. His book is Drying Up: The Freshwater Crisis in Florida. Congratulations, John Dunn.
Well, thank you, and hello, everyone. Well, I feel extremely complimented that my book was chosen to receive this award. And it's an extra honor for me to be recognized with the prize that bears the name of Stetson Kennedy, a man I have long considered a Florida hero, legend, and inspiration. I was lucky to have been present at a few of Stetson's talks about the Klan and other matters over the years. And I've conversed with him a few times, and I was at his memorial service, or one of his memorial services last year. And it was attended by hundreds of people whose lives he had touched. Along with Stetson, I am a native Floridian, and in my 7 decades, I've been witness to the relentless destruction of Florida's natural world. And like Stetson, I used a journalistic writing style in drawing up the freshwater crisis in Florida to provide, I hope, a comprehensive look at Florida's water woes, which include overpumping, hydrology destruction, water pollution, and sea level rise. But I also tried to end the book with advice from experts on what we can do to preserve and restore what we've lost. And I'd like to end by saying that I appreciate that by spotlighting my book, the Florida Historical Society is also helping to bring this much needed attention to one of our most pressing environmental problems, and I'm grateful for that effort. And I'm very honored to be here today. So thank you very much.
Congratulations again, John. The James J. Horgan Award is for an outstanding book based on Florida history intended for younger readers. James J. Horgan was a history professor at St. Leo College and a former Florida Historical Society board member. This year's recipient of the James J. Horgan Award is author J.A. Kennedy. J.A. Kennedy based her novel, Don't Tell, The Secrets of Pinehurst Seminary on actual events from the life of her maternal grandfather. Julie is also a volunteer here at the Florida Historical Society. Congratulations, Julie.
Thank you very much. I feel very honored. I don't think I've ever won an award for anything. So this is very special to me. Florida history is everything to me. I'm a 5th generation Floridian. My family settled here before it was a state. And I'm also a genealogy buff. And between that and the stories my mother used to tell me about her Florida, growing up in Florida in her young years, and what her father did in Florida, it was just amazing to me. And the story, unfortunately, was a story that most people would be shocked to hear now. The abuse, the neglect, the just horrible situation that these children faced day in, day out at this boarding school in St. Johns County. And I was able to corroborate what my grandfather told my mother by newspaper articles. There were other former students who spoke out about this. And it was quite horrifying, actually. And I was able to put it into words that a 4th grader, maybe 5th grader could be entertained by and understand. And I'm hoping that maybe someday it'll get recognized by Brevard County School Board or others and get put in the classroom. That would be something else. But as far as thanking, I need to thank you, Dr. Brote-Markle. You took a chance on me as a first-time author, and I appreciate that so much. And I do feel honored with this award and for your thoughtfulness and generosity in choosing my book to print. Thank you.
Congratulations again, Julie. The Arthur W. Thompson Award is for the most outstanding article to be published in the Florida Historical Quarterly. Arthur W. Thompson was a longtime history professor at the University of Florida and former editor of the Florida Historical Quarterly. The recipient of this year's Arthur W. Thompson Award is Jacob Ivey. Jacob Ivey is a professor of history at the Florida Institute of Technology. His article is The Happiest Place on Earth, ? South Africa, divestment, and the anti-apartheid movements in Orlando, Florida in the 1980s. Congratulations, Jacob Ivey.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you so much. And I'm humbled and honored to be selected for this award. And I'll admit, I was initially surprised, largely because this project was always intended to be a small deviation from my current book project on the African constabulary in 19th century South Africa. But when I returned to Florida, I'm also a native Floridian, in 2015 to join the faculty of Florida Tech, I actually began searching around for something local that connected my research in South Africa with my home state, largely because research trips to Orlando are much easier than to KwaZulu-Natal. On almost a whim, I actually began searching for a connection between Florida and South Africa and was thrilled to discover that numerous groups in Florida were part of the global anti-apartheid struggle that dominated the social consciousness of the 1980s. And I learned that these protesters in Florida were fully aware of their global connections and acted accordingly in, I think, commemorable and incredibly memorable ways that I'm very proud to share. And I wouldn't have made these connections if I had not returned to Florida and took that leap in digging into this project. And this realization is illustrated once again that projects sometimes come to you from unexpected places. And I'm so grateful for the positive reception this work has received. And I really do look forward to building upon it to a larger project on anti-apartheid across the state, from Tallahassee to Gainesville to Tampa to Miami. And I also particularly look forward to presenting on the topic at a future Florida Historical Society conference. And I can only hope that it's face-to-face. Just really quick, I'd like to thank Dr. Connie Lester for her initial interest in the piece and support for its publication, as well as the board of editors and the staff of the Florida Historical Quarterly. I'd also like to thank my colleague, Dr. Matt Wayne, Dr. Lisa Perdigo, and Dr. Bob Taylor for their advice and assistance on the initial paper presented at the Florida Historical Society Conference in Sarasota that became this article. And I'd like to make one final comment about this project. The history of the anti-apartheid struggle and the support for racial justice has gained even more importance in our current social and political climate. The protests for social justice and reform that rock the country and the world illustrate that Black lives matter now more than ever. And my only hope is that this current wave of protests have the same positive results as the anti-apartheid movement, which successfully ended one of the greatest civil rights abusers of the 20th century. Thank you again. I'm humbled and I'm honored.
Congratulations again, Jacob. The Hampton Dunn Digital Media Award is for an outstanding digital media project expanding knowledge of Florida history. Hampton Dunn was a print and television journalist who pioneered efforts to preserve Florida history through photographs. The recipient of this year's Hampton Dunn Digital Media Award is Robert I. Davidson. Davidson is creator of the digital archive, Origins and History of the Palm Beaches. Congratulations, Robert Davidson.
Okay, thank you. I would like to thank the Florida Historical Society for awarding me the annual Hampton Dunn Digital Media Award for my Origins and History of the Palm Beaches Digital Archive. As you know, Hampton Dunn was a pioneer in the use of radio and television to educate and promote Florida history. I hope to carry on his tradition by using the internet and my digital archive to promote local history in the Palm Beaches for public educational and research use. A little bit about myself. I started out in journalism, so I knew about Hampton Dunn when I was in journalism school at the University of Florida. I was in journalism for about 12 years. I worked at the Florida Keys Keynoter, the Palm Beach Post, Palm Beach Evening Times, and the Boca Raton News. I then got a job with county government as the head of the genealogy research and government research sections of the Palm Beach County Library System. So for 25 years, I was not doing much writing at all. But once I retired in 2014, I decided to begin writing about local history, which is always something I really loved. And this archive is the end result of that. Some of the articles have been published in newspapers and journals. Some are just online for the public benefit. All the articles that I put online are free and available because I think that's a goal of all librarians. So I'd like once again, thank you for this award.
Congratulations again, Robert Davidson. The Governor Leroy Collins Award is for most outstanding postgraduate thesis or dissertation. Governor Collins promoted significant improvements in public education at all levels. This year's recipient of the Governor Leroy Collins Award is Graham McPherson. Graham McPherson graduated from the University of Central Florida with an MA in history. His thesis is called Making Our Voices Heard, Power and Citizenship in Central Florida's Black Communities. Congratulations, Graham McPherson.
Greetings. to the Florida Historical Society. My name is Graham McPherson, and I am grateful and honored to be the recipient of the 2020 Governor Leroy Collins Award. As a historian, my research on Black urban communities, particularly in Central Florida, is important to me because it is relevant to current issues of social injustice and inequalities. In contributing to scholarship of Black citizenship and Black political power, my research shows the agency of ordinary people in shaping the destinies of their community. As I have begun my journey in the doctoral program at the University of Virginia, I hope to continue to expand on my research, ask new questions, and continue to contribute to the field of Black urban history. I first want to thank my thesis committee at the University of Central Florida, my advisor, Dr. Robert Castanello, and my two committee members, Dr. Connie Lester and Dr. Ezekiel Walker, for their guidance, critique, and support during this thesis process. Additionally, I want to thank Dr. Scott French for creating the opportunity for me to collaborate with Ms. Wanda Theory and the Association to Preserve the Edenville Community, who play an important role in my research. I also want to thank the UCF History Department, the faculty, staff, and fellow graduate students who were part of my academic journey. Lastly, I want to thank my parents, George and Gloria McPherson, as well as my faith, for providing me with a strong foundation to succeed. Once again, to the Florida Historical Society, thank you so much for this great honor.
Congratulations again, Graham and McPherson. The David C. Brotmarkle Award is for creative expressions of Florida history other than books. David C. Brotmarkle was a lieutenant colonel in the United States Air Force, an educator, businessman, supporter of arts and culture, and my father. It should be noted that the 2018 recipient of this award, Florida folk musician Frank Thomas, passed away on September 9th. He was the last of the great Florida troubadours like Gamble Rogers and Paul Champion. He performed for decades at the Florida Folk Festival. The recipient of this year's David C. Brotmarkle Award is John White. John White is Director of Media Production for the Florida Historical Society. John and I were friends and collaborators on media projects long before either of us were at the Florida Historical Society. John has had more than 25-year career in educational media. He's being recognized for his work as editor for Florida Frontiers Radio and Television, a job that I make challenging for him. Congratulations, John.
Hey there, everyone. I got to tell you, I'm a lot more comfortable on that side of the camera instead of this side. In fact, it's for that, being behind the camera, that I'm being recognized. I've been awarded the 2020 David C. Brotmarkle Award for doing video production for Florida Historical Society. Didn't even realize I'd been nominated, so thank you to whomever nominated me and to those who voted for me. So the recognition is very much appreciated. Thank you.
Congratulations again, John White. We have a new award this year, the Dorothy Dodd Outstanding Archivist Award. Dorothy Dodd was a former Florida State Librarian and longtime supporter of the Florida Historical Society. This year's recipient of the first Dorothy Dodd Outstanding Archivist Award is our own Ben DiBiase. Ben DiBiase started as a student intern for the Florida Historical Society and worked his way up to Director of Educational Resources and Archivist at the Library of Florida History in Cocoa. He has many responsibilities above and beyond that of a traditional archivist, but is also a great archivist in the traditional sense. Congratulations, Ben.
Hello, everyone. I'm sorry I couldn't make it to the awards ceremony online, but I just want to express my gratitude to the Florida Historical Society Board of Directors for giving me the Dorothy Dodd Outstanding Archivist Award, the first one. It's absolutely incredible, and I'm really thrilled and really touched for the recognition. To even be in the same sentence as someone like Dorothy Dodd is incredible. She did so much to preserve Florida's history, and I'm just trying to do continue on that work, and I'm really just a small piece of the puzzle. I enjoy the work. I love sharing that passion with others, especially with students who are interested in preservation and archival sciences and history in general. So I really, really appreciate it. This is exciting. It's wonderful, and thank you so much. And I'm happy to be in this position, and will continue to do what I can to preserve Florida's history through caring for, organizing, cataloging, and making available these documents and resources. So thank you so much.
Congratulations again, Ben DiBiase. We have a new name for our volunteer award this year, the George Leland Speedy Harrell Volunteer Award. Speedy Harrell was a dedicated Florida Historical Society volunteer, author of 4 books on local history, and founder of the Mosquito Beaters. We're recognizing a couple who were both individually very important to our operations, Linda Watson and Bob Mink. Linda Watson has worked diligently to document items in our archival collections, most notably adding to our understanding of our extensive map collection. Bob Mink is an engaging docent at the Brevard Museum of History and Natural Science and has helped us with educational outreach outside of the museum. They're both valuable members of the Florida Historical Society team. Congratulations, Linda Watson and Bob Mink.
I'll go first. Again, my name is Bob Mink, and I am a docent at the Brevard Museum of History and Natural Science. I really enjoy my time there with the other docents and other volunteers, and Holly Baker, our museum director. I'm a retired geologist. I have had a very fulfilling, rewarding career as a geologist. And when I retired in 2011, I started immediately volunteering at other museums, natural history museums, archaeological parks, historical places. And for the last 4 years, I've been a volunteer docent at the Brevard Museum of History and Natural Science, which I have truly enjoyed. The reason that I volunteer is it's a STEM effort on my part. I had a rewarding career, and I like our visitors, especially the student age visitors, to understand that history and science can be both very interesting and rewarding. So that is one of my primary reasons for volunteering there. Also, I just like to talk to people about subjects that I find interesting. So thank you for the award, and I appreciate the opportunity to do things at the museum that I truly enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. And your co-recipient there is Linda Watson. Congratulations to you as well, Linda.
Thank you. I just wanted to say I'm greatly honored and surprised to be receiving this award. And I consider myself very lucky to have found the Florida Historical Society after a career of decades working with maps and collections. When I first retired, I didn't think I might want to do that again, but then I got bored, and then somehow I found the Florida Historical Society, and I'm very glad I did. It's been a wonderful experience. Everyone at the society is like family and good friends, and I really enjoy working on particularly the map collections, because that was my specialty. But I just thank you for this award.
Congratulations again, Linda Watson and Bob Mink. The Marinus Latour Presidential Citation recognizes outstanding service promoting or expanding knowledge of Florida history in ways that are not acknowledged by another award category. Another very active couple is being recognized with this award, Cisco and Gloria Dean. Both Cisco and Gloria are natives of Bunnell, where they attended elementary school together. Their families were residents of the area for generations before that. Both Cisco and Gloria have been very active with the Flagler County Historical Society. While they have traveled the world, Cisco and Gloria Dean remain loyal to Florida history. Whether it's a talk at the Library of Florida History, an exhibit opening at the Brevard Museum of History and Natural Science, or an FHS annual meeting and symposium, you can count on Cisco and Gloria to drive to it from Flagler County if at all possible. They were also the first to become part of the producer circle in support of Florida Frontiers Television. I'm proud to present the Marinus Latour Presidential Citation to Cisco and Gloria Dean.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm overwhelmed. History is my passion. And when you pursue your passion and you're recognized for it, sometimes it feels good. History has been in both our bloods. You mentioned we're both from Flagler County. What you didn't mention was that when Gloria's parents eloped, my parents went with them. So there's no secrets there. We know the history of the family.
But we did not get together until much later in our lives. Cisco's passion is history, and I support him in that. I'm interested, but I would mostly describe myself as curious. I really love learning about new and different things. And so to me, going to the various presentations and the annual meetings and all are just absolutely amazing. The interesting things you learn and the wonderful, interesting people you meet. So, it's always a pleasure to be there. Cisco and I were both astounded. I moved to tears when we received the email from Ben about this award. Sometimes you kind of expect an award, but this one came right out of the blue, and it just means so much. So thank you all very much.
Gloria and I are sort of like the yin and the yang. She was Flagler County's first Peace Corps volunteer, and I went into the military. I think probably her being a Quaker had something to do with that. And like she said, we've traveled the world. And when I get involved in history, I really want to tell it, what I've learned. I do like to talk to people about history. Flagler County, when we were born, the population was less than 4,000. There's over 115,000 folks here now. And I sort of feel it's my duty a little bit to explain the history to them. And we celebrated our 100th anniversary 3 years ago. And I approached some organization down in Cocoa called the Florida Historical Society, I think it was. And they produced this little program called Florida Frontiers. And I said, it would be great if we did a Florida Frontier on our 100th anniversary for Flagler County. And Ben, John, the whole staff came up and worked with us. It was a beautiful product. So thank you.
Congratulations again, Cisco and Gloria Dean, and I know you're watching this now. The Caroline P. Rossiter Award is for Outstanding Woman in Florida History. Caroline P. Rossiter became an active businesswoman in 1920, just months after women received the right to vote. The recipient of this year's Caroline P. Rossiter Award for Outstanding Woman in Florida History is Sherry Johnson. Sherry Johnson is an historian, educator, and author who has dedicated her career to documenting Florida history and sharing her discoveries with others. She is Director of Academic Programs, Latin American and Caribbean Center at Florida International University, and Sherry was a longtime Florida Historical Society board member. Sherry couldn't be with us today, but thanks the committee for this award. And thank you, Sherry, for your great work. The Michael V. Gannett Award for Lifetime Achievement was named after a renowned Florida historian, author, and professor of history at the University of Florida. This year's recipient of the Michael V. Gannett Award for Lifetime Achievement is Samuel Boldrick. Sam Boldrick was a longtime librarian at Miami-Dade Public Library in the Florida Collection, a leader in the Miami chapter of the National Railway Historical Society, and former Florida Historical Society president. And I want to personally thank Sam. He was president of the Florida Historical Society at the same time I came on board as executive director more than 12 years ago, and he was always very receptive to the new ideas that I had for the Florida Historical Society, and I want to thank him for that. Sam couldn't be with us today, but we do have his picture holding his award, and thank you, Sam, for your service. Congratulations once again to all of this year's Florida Historical Society Award recipients. plan to join us again tomorrow as we present the panel discussion, 100 Years of the 19th Amendment, Florida Women Breaking Barriers. The panel discussion will feature public historian Peggy McDonald, Kimberly Wilmot Voss from the University of Central Florida, and Zohara Simmons from the University of Florida in Gainesville. Our moderator will be Florida Historical Society President Emily Liska. We'll also have our membership meeting where you can find out about all of our exciting projects and programs. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you tomorrow.